Okay, so tonight's story is all about Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam. And we're going to learn about a queen in this story. And originally, I was going to tell you about a different queen. I was originally going to tell you about Queen Asya and the story of Prophet Musa alayhi salam. But we actually talked about Queen Asya and Musa alayhi salam when we talked about Musa alayhi salam's birth story way back early on in this series when we were talking about the letter B and basket and boy and baby. And so instead of talking about the same queen, I'm going to tell you a story about Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam.
And the Queen of Saba.
And yes, the Queen of Saba or Sheba. And her name was Bilqis. But before we start talking about Sulayman alayhi salam and Bilqis, we're going to go back to the beginning. And we are going to talk about Prophet Sulayman
As a kid?
alayhi salam and his life. Maybe there's not too much about him as a child, but we'll see. But first, he came from a very blessed family. He was part of the Bani Israel, and he was.
All from Bani Israel?
No, that remember we have to go all the way back to Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam if we want to know which prophets are from Bani Israel and the ones that are not. It is like a very, it's like a tribe, but because many generations have passed, that tribe is like a nation.
The Bani Israel sounds like kids.
Yes, it's the children of Israel.
Yeah, so
the tribe.
Their children?
Well, it's the children's children's children. It's just it's a way to describe the whole lineage. So if
only people could go in it if their mother or father was in it?
Yes, if you were born into it or you married into it, then your children are part of that lineage, yes. And so if you go all the way back to Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, and you remember that at first he was married to Sarah, and he could not have children with Sarah, and so then he married Hajar, and with Hajar he had a son named Ismail, and then later, soon after, with Sarah, he also had a child named Ishaq. So the lineage of Ishaq is all of the prophets that came to the Jews. All of them. Many, many, many prophets.
So
that
she's Jewish?
Muslim. A believer. And so...
Why were they called Muslims back then?
They had different names, I think. And so I think the people of Ibrahim were Hanif. I think they're believers. And so Bani Israel are all of the descendants, all of the prophets and the people that came from Ishaq's lineage. At Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, the lineage splits. And one lineage are all the prophets that came to the Jews. And then in the other lineage, there's just two prophets. Only two. Prophet Ismail, and then a very long break. A very, very, very long break. And then who was the last one? Yes, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there's only two on that lineage, and then many, many, many. I don't even know how many, many on the other lineage. And it spanned for hundreds, thousands, hundreds, all the way up to thousands of years. I don't know how long, but it was a very long, long lineage. Lots of people, lots of prophets. And so Sulayman alayhi salam comes from a very blessed family, very blessed lineage. And it's the same lineage as Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam and Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. So he has some very pious prophets in his ancestry. And his father, Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam's father, was the great prophet and the king, Prophet, do you remember?
Like what?
Do you remember who he was? The prophet and the king, who was the father of Prophet Sulayman? he defeated a giant? Do you remember? It starts with a D.
Prophet Dawood.
Dawood, very good. His name was Prophet Dawood alayhi salam. And his mother was also very special. She was noble, she was pious, and she taught Sulayman alayhi salam many things. Even Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam spoke of Sulayman's mother, Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam's mother. And this is what he said. Once, Sulayman's mother told him, "Son, do not sleep all night, because spending most of the night in sleep deprives the person from good deeds on the day of judgment." Very wise woman. So what do you suppose she was advising her son to do in the middle of the night? Wake up, stay up, and do what? Pray. Very good. Okay. Now, Prophet Dawood alayhi salam had many special powers, and Prophet Sulayman actually has some amazing powers as well.
Speak to the jinn.
He couldn't just speak to the jinn, he could also control them. So, no, I don't think that he was part of the jinn that Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam was interacting with. So he had many powers, he had many abilities, he was blessed with many wonderful talents. He was also able to understand the language of the birds and the animals, and not only could he understand what the birds and the animals were saying, but he could also speak to them, and the birds and the animals could understand him. And this is very incredible. Do you know why this is also incredible for me today? Is that certainly the animals and the birds were relaying information, were communicating something about that present situation, which means that they must have thoughts about what's going on. And we're going to talk about a story about the ants in a little bit. But that means that even today, because animals and birds are the same today as they were 1,000 years ago, they must also have thoughts about what's going on in that moment. Like if you're cutting down a tree and that tree has the home of a bird in it, certainly they would be afraid or worried or disappointed or something else. Because we'll find out in a little bit what the ants told Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam. Also, Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam even had birds at his side in his palace. I don't know which kind of birds, but some birds are used for hunting. Certain hawks and falcons are used for hunting. Some birds are used for relaying messages, like carrier pigeons. They can bring a message to and from people. Birds can also be somewhat like a companion if you get a talking parrot. There are some types of birds that can learn maybe up to 100, maybe even 200 words. And you can teach them those words. Yeah. Or like in that book that we read about the bird that had learned all those words. And then there are birds that can be your pets. It's maybe not the typical animal when you think of a pet. Maybe you mostly think of a dog or a cat as a pet. But these birds served in Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam's forces. When Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam would go into battle, the birds would fly by his side and by the army. And the birds would act as scouts and messengers, because they could fly out over the enemy, and then they could come back and they could tell Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam about the enemy. And because Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam could understand the birds, he could find out what was going on. It was very unique. You can't do that otherwise. Well, actually, you can do that today. Not with birds, but with other kinds of technology. But back then, when they didn't have that technology, they used other things. And Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam could use birds because he could understand them. The birds could understand him. Yes, he could. Yeah, you're right. And so these birds could, within a few minutes, they could fly over the enemy. They could even fly farther and see how far away the enemy was from Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam and his army. They could tell him how many people were in the forces, what kind of forces the enemy had, how many soldiers, like how many foot soldiers, how many soldiers on horses, and if there were any other kinds of animals in the army. And another thing that Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam had that I don't know of any other prophet who had this power, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam the king of jinns. Now, jinn...
He's not even a jinn.
Hmm?
He's not even a jinn.
He's not. Now, jinn are different than humans. Do you remember what humans are created from?
Clay.
They are created from clay. Very good. And do you remember what jinn are created from?
Fire. And we're also made of different things like water.
Mm-hmm. Very good. We're actually made out of quite a bit of water. You're right. But
And blood.
blood, which is also made out of a lot of water. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam alayhi salam, he took clay dust or clay, dirt, and fashioned Adam alayhi salam out of clay. When he created jinn, he created them out of fire.
So like, Shaitan might be able to strengthen.
I don't think he's the oldest jinn, but he certainly was a very special jinn, and pretty much everybody knows him.
He was so good.
He's the most popular jinn, in a negative way.
And he also had the power of wind.
Wow, you are really remembering all about Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam. Yes, Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam did have other powers that we're going to talk about in just 1 minute. I will say that angels are created out of, what did you say?
Light.
Light, very good. Angels are created out of light. So, we don't look like clay, but we come from clay.
Oh, and the color clay he carves us out is the color we are.
In a way, because clay comes in all different colors, and people on this planet come in all different colors.
Yeah, but like if your mother and father like both had dark skin, then would you have dark skin?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if they had dark skin and then light skin, they would have dark skin or light skin.
Yeah, or a mix. Something kind of a blend in between. So if you have a mother and a father that both have dark skin, you'll have dark skin. Almost always. But suppose somewhere in your lineage on your mom's side, and somewhere or in your ancestry rather on your mom's side or your dad's side, or rather on both. Suppose you have a great-great-grandmother who had light skin on your mom's side, and a great-great-grandfather on your dad's side that had light skin. It's possible that even with two parents that have dark skin, you could end up with light skin. It's something we'll learn about in biology a lot later. But yes, in general, if your parents are light-skinned, chances are you're going to be light-skinned too. If your parents are dark-skinned, then you will be dark-skinned too. And if one parent is dark-skinned and one parent is light-skinned, you either will be dark, light, or somewhere in between. And then within that, there are so many different ranges. A little bit of yellow, a little bit of red.
Sorry.
Okay. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created jinn out of fire, angels out of light, humans out of clay. Now, jinn are invisible to us. They may occupy the same space, but they are invisible to us. Angels are invisible to us. They may occupy the same space, but they are invisible.
And they're not they're invisible thing where if they make a noise, you can hear it, and you can't bump into each other. You can just go through it.
Exactly, you go right through.
Like shaitan could be like right here.
Yes, jinn could be right here, and you would not be able to see them. You would go right through them. That is correct. Angels the same way. That is correct.
And they can see all of they can see your brain inside of your
that I'm not sure about. I'm not sure if they could see inside your skeleton. That is a good thing to think about. Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam had control over the jinn, even though they are invisible to humans, and angels are invisible to humans as well. But Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam had control over them because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had blessed him with that ability. So even the evil jinn also had to obey Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam. The good jinn and the evil jinn. And so at his command, Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam could command the jinn to build magnificent palaces and mansions and castles, and the jinn would have to obey him. And if there was a battle or a war, the jinn had to obey him. And if he summoned them to fight in his army, the jinn would have to follow his orders and his commands. So far we've talked about two blessings, two powers and gifts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given to Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam. The first one was his ability to communicate with animals. He could speak to animals, and the animals would understand him, and the animals could speak to him, and he could understand the animals. That was one power, one gift that he had. The other power that he had was that he had control over the jinn. He had control over them. He was their king, and they had to follow his rules and his commands. And the third power that he had was the power to control the wind. Now, this is a pretty exciting power to have. And in some cases, it can be pretty useful. He could change the direction of the wind. He could change the intensity or the strength of the wind. And so that if he was traveling from one place to another, he could have the wind be at his back so that it felt like the wind was helping him on his journey and not against him, which can become very difficult. It can slow you down. But when the wind is behind you, it can speed you up. And it practically would carry Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam to his destination faster, so fast that in some cases he could do a month's journey in only a day. But what's pretty amazing about his ability and the way that the wind could do that for him was that no matter how strong the wind was, no matter how fast it carried him from one place to another, the wind, when it was around Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam, was never harsh. It was always calm. It was always gentle. And it never harmed Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also gave Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam one other very beautiful gift. A gift that he had also given to his father, Prophet Dawood alayhi salam. And this blessing was the blessing of ilm, knowledge, and of hikmah, wisdom. So Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam, like his father, was blessed with knowledge and wisdom. And this helped both prophets make wise decisions, helped them in battle, helped with disputes among people that part of their community, part of the people that they ruled over, so that if there were disputes or arguments, they had the ability to help resolve them because of their knowledge and their wisdom. Now, Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam was blessed with these abilities even as a child. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had blessed him with these abilities from a very young age to have knowledge and wisdom. Now, from the time we're very young, we are acquiring knowledge. Every day we are learning more. But to have wisdom is something that takes years before you have it. Now, sometimes people can be pretty wise when they're young, but usually it happens after you've acquired a lot of knowledge and also a lot of experience. And when you can reflect on both of those things, you tend to be a wiser person. But Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam was blessed with wisdom even from a young age. So I'm going to tell you this story about how Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam was blessed with knowledge and wisdom even when he was young. Before we talk about the queen, that's going to come up in a little bit, I want to tell you about the story of the damaged crops, the crops that got damaged. There once was two men who had an argument and they needed to settle a disagreement. And they came to Prophet Dawood alayhi salam, which is the father of Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam. He was the king, and they needed to resolve a problem, and they wanted to have Prophet Dawood alayhi salam help them with their problem. They knew that he was wise, and they knew that he was fair. Now both of the men agreed on what had happened. One man owned sheep, and those sheep had escaped from the land, like maybe the fence had broken, and had gotten into another man's crop and had destroyed the crop, and probably ate it. And maybe the crop was wheat, or maybe it was barley or something else, but the crop was destroyed and the sheep had been responsible. Now both the men agreed on what had happened, but neither of the men could agree on what the solution was, and they could not settle this disagreement. So Prophet Dawood alayhi salam listened to both men and decided that the price of the sheep was equal to the cost of the damaged crops. The owner of the crops should get the sheep. The sheep destroyed the crops. He has no way to make money off those crops, and the price of the crops happens to be about the price of the sheep. Now, Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam listened to the argument and listened to the resolution, the decision that his father made. And while it was definitely a just decision, he felt there might be an even better decision. So he said, "O Father, even though your ruling is fair, it would be better if the owner of the crops is given the sheep only until the crops are restored."
Wait, who's saying this to?
Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam is telling his father, "Father, you've made a very good decision. It is fair that the owner of the crops should get the sheep, but I have an idea. The owner of the crops should get the sheep only until the crops are restored. While he owns the sheep, he may benefit from the wool that the sheep have, and he can make money off of the milk from the sheep. So during that time, he won't lose his livelihood, but in time, the crops will be restored. And once the crops are restored, then the owner of the sheep may have his sheep returned. Prophet Dawud alayhi salam smiled and nodded at the wiser decision his son had made. So while Prophet Dawud alayhi salam made a good decision, a wise and fair decision, Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam had made an even better one. And so they decided on the solution that Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam had suggested. Now, throughout his life, Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam would encounter even more difficult problems in which he needed to solve and find resolutions for. So I'm going to tell you one more story. This is about two women who were arguing over one baby. There was an older woman and a younger woman, and both of them lived within Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam's kingdom. And each one of them had a baby boy. And each one of them loved their son very much. And each one of them would do anything in the world for their baby boys. Now, something happened one night. A terrible thing happened. A tragic thing happened one night. A wolf crept into the place where the women kept their babies. It's possible that the women slept in maybe some kind of tent or something outside, or maybe even a home that had like maybe adobe bricks, but some place where the baby slept in a place where tragically a wolf could enter. And a wolf did enter where the babies were sleeping and snatched one of the babies and left. And very sadly, that baby was probably dead. And the following morning, when the women awoke, they were horrified to see that one of the babies had been taken. And the mothers argued over which baby it was that had been taken. "This is my baby," yelled the older woman. "Give him back to me right now." "No," said the younger woman. "This baby is mine. This baby is mine. Look at this baby. He resembles our family." The two children, the two babies, certainly resembled one another, but one belonged to the older woman and one belonged to the younger woman. And each argued over whose baby was still alive. The younger woman said, "The baby is mine. The wolf took your baby." And the older woman said, "This baby is mine. The wolf took your baby."
How do they know it was the wolf?
It's possible the wolf had done this before. It's possible someone had seen the baby's clothes, or sadly even other parts that would indicate that the wolf had taken the baby. So the two women were screaming at each other. They were both clearly very upset. And eventually a crowd of people formed around them. And more people gathered. And some joined one side, and some joined the other side. And some said, no, the baby is the younger woman. And some people said, no, the baby belongs to the older woman. And finally, when no resolution could be found, and all the people were involved, and the two women fought bitterly for the baby that was alive, they finally took their problem to Prophet Dawood alayhi salam. Prophet Dawood alayhi salam listened very carefully to the story. And after hearing both sides of the story, Prophet Dawood alayhi salam decided that the baby should be given to the older woman. The younger lady was not happy with this decision, of course, because she felt that the baby was hers. And she continued to argue that the baby was hers. She probably made a very good case. So, they took the case to Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam. As he heard the case, Sulayman knew that he would have to do something to find out which of the two ladies was lying and which of the two ladies was telling the truth. Suddenly he had an idea. It's a pretty horrible idea, but it will find out who the mother really is. "Bring me a knife," he said, "and I will cut the baby right down the middle, and you may each have half of the baby." The women were horrified. Everyone in the room was shocked. Nobody said a word. How could he kill a baby? That doesn't make sense. You can't have half a baby. What is he even thinking? But the younger woman suddenly jumped up to protect her baby. "No," she screamed. "Don't cut the baby. The older woman may have the baby. I will not argue anymore. Please leave the baby alone." Sulayman alayhi salam looked at the younger woman, whose eyes were filled with fear and tears and concern for the baby's safety. Then he looked at the older woman, who had kept silent. He knew that the real mother would love her baby so much, she would sacrifice anything for her baby. So the real mother would throw herself in front of the baby to let the baby live. "The baby belongs to the younger woman," declared Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam, and he handed the baby to her. Now, Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam had many other skills and powers, like the power to understand animals and the ants. The ants that walk on the floor, on the ground. Tiny little black ants. Not the ants like the uncles, but the tiny ones. Yes, this is the story of the ants. It will be very quick. There once was a time when Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam was coming with his army down into the valley. And the road rumbled with the sound of his army and the horses and the people. And the ants could feel the rumbling from far. And they could sense trouble. And as the forces drew closer and closer to the ant colony, the ants realized that this was a problem. The army was going to destroy the ant colony. "Hurry, hurry," yelled the ants. "Get inside the tunnels and the homes. Get out of the way or you will be crushed. There is no time to waste. The army is coming, the horses, the people. They are marching through this valley and they will destroy us." The ants immediately stopped what they were doing, and from all different directions they ran into the tunnels. They were probably collecting food and building other homes and colonies and taking care of the ant eggs and larvae. But they stopped everything and they tried to get to safety. Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam, however, was able to understand the language of the ants. And when he heard the ants crying out, he smiled And he thanked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for blessing him with such a gift. And he ordered his troops to stop marching. And he communicated to the king of the ants that the ants should not worry. And when all the ants were safe and secure, Prophet Sulayman ordered his forces to walk the other way. And they continued on their way through the valley of the ants, very carefully, so as not to disturb the ants and their homes. Now we get to the story about the queen. This is the queen of Saba, or Sheba. Now, on the east of King Sulayman's kingdom lived the queen of Saba. Saba was a powerful state with a great army. And the queen of Saba, or Sheba, was a wise and intelligent woman named Bilqis. She was loved and respected by her people. Now, one of Sulayman alayhi salam's messenger birds, the hoopoe, I think is what you call it, had been to the queen's land and had seen a very strange sight. He came back to Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam and said, Bilqis, the queen of Saba, is a very wise and intelligent woman. And yet, she does not worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Instead, she and her people worship the sun. When the bird returned to Prophet Sulayman to inform him of this, Sulayman alayhi salam listened very carefully to what the hoopoe had to say. And when the bird finished his story, Prophet Sulayman's eyes suddenly twinkled with an idea. Prophet Sulayman was going to do something spectacular. First, he wrote a letter to the Queen of Saba and ordered that his bird should deliver it. And remember, some birds, even today, are carrier pigeons, and they can send messages from one place to another. The bird immediately flapped its wings and was off in a whoosh and was on its way to the Queen of Saba, to Bilqis. As the bird approached Saba with the letter, it circled the queen's palace and then swooped in and dropped the letter in a place where the bird was sure the queen would find it. The hoopoe then flew away out of the palace, disappearing into the sky. When Queen Bilqis found the letter, she showed it to her advisors. The letter read, "This letter is from Sulayman, and in the name of Allah, the beneficent, the merciful, you should not consider yourself to be a great person or better than me. You should embrace the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and come to me as a believer." The advisors felt that there was no need to worry about starting a war or a battle because the army of Saba was very mighty and always ready for battle. But they reminded the queen that she was responsible for making the final decision. Don't worry, you won't go to battle. But if you wish to entertain these ideas, you may do so. You are a wise queen. Bilqis did not want to create any danger for the people of Saba, and though she did not want to stop worshipping the sun and worship Allah, she did try to win Prophet Sulayman by sending him gifts and presents. When Prophet Sulayman received the gifts from the queen, he actually felt insulted. I don't need gifts, he must have thought. I am spreading to you the message of belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to abandon these sinful ways of worshiping the sun and other things that are not worthy of worship. So he told his messengers, "What is this? Do you think that your wealth will change my mind? The blessings of Allah has given me are far better than these gifts." And so he told the messengers to take the gifts back to the queen, and that if she does not comply with his orders, he will invade the kingdom of Saba with his mighty army. The queen's messengers looked at each other in surprise. They are probably not used to being denied. Usually, other kings and rulers would accept these gifts. They may still go to battle, but they would accept the gifts. When Bilqis heard what happened from her messengers, she was actually kind of interested. She wasn't angry, maybe not even offended. She decided she wanted to meet this powerful king named Sulayman and to learn more about his religion. And it was not long before Prophet Sulayman learned that the queen was planning to visit him. Now, in those days, you could send letters saying that you were going to come, and usually it took a while to travel, and yet still Prophet Sulayman was able to learn about this in time to do something pretty spectacular. Now, he was glad that she was coming because he wanted to have a chance to show her some of the magnificent, amazing things that he could do by the blessings and power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a few days later, Prophet Sulayman learned that the queen was approaching his kingdom with a group of her followers, her entourage, maybe her advisors and her servants. And he called on the jinns and asked them, "Which one of you can bring me the throne of the queen before she arrives?" One of them said, "I can bring it to you in a blink of an eye." Instantly, the queen's throne appeared before Sulayman alayhi salam. He smiled and exclaimed, "This has been possible by the grace of Allah," because it would not have been possible other way. It's as if it was just appeared out of thin air, but really, the jinn had brought it over very fast, super fast. Then he ordered the jinns to change the appearance of the throne so that it no longer looked like the throne the queen was used to. When the queen arrived with her people, Sulayman alayhi salam greeted her and asked if she recognized the throne. Queen Bilqis stared at the throne for a long time and thought to herself, it really did look like her own throne, but it was decorated a little bit differently. So it was familiar, not quite exactly the same, but nearly the same. And she began to wonder how it could be possible that anybody could have taken her throne while it was being guarded in her palace. And even if somebody could have taken the throne, how could they have changed it before she even arrived to Prophet Sulayman's kingdom? It just didn't make sense. So she turned to Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam and told him that yes, the throne looked very similar, but it was different in appearance. It looked a little bit different than the way that throne looked right then and there. And Sulayman motioned towards the palace, like to come in to the palace. Bilqis turned towards the entrance of the beautiful palace that shimmered, probably because it had gold and crystal everywhere, or maybe just gold. The jinns had been ordered by Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam to build it. It was made out of marble and crystal and gold, so all these beautiful materials that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, but they were fashioned in a very unique, beautiful way. So the materials Allah created, and the jinn had been able to construct a palace that was magnificent. She looked at Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam, who once again motioned for her to come inside the entrance. And she began to place her foot right at the entrance of the palace. And Queen Bilqis noticed that the floors were glistening with water. How strange that the floor would be covered with water. But maybe she thought, the people in the West have unique ways. Maybe this kingdom does things differently. And the whole floor was filled with water. So before she stepped into the palace, she held up her dress so that her dress wouldn't get wet when she walked into the palace. So she drew her dress up and she stepped into the palace very carefully. And as she put her foot down into the water, she was shocked because her foot was not wet. She was amazed because it was solid ground. Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam smiled at the queen and said that the palace was paved in glass. There was no water, but it was the shiniest glass so that it appeared like water. And as she put her foot down, it was cool and solid. The glass was so shiny, it actually looked like water. Queen Bilqis could not believe what had just happened. She looked at the floor. She kept thinking it was water. As she put her foot down, it was dry and solid. And at that moment, she realized many things that may not be true may be. And things that she believed in, that she thought were true, were in reality not true. So even though she thought that the glass was water, indeed it was not. It was solid. And though she believed in that the sun is God, she worshipped the sun as God, she knew that the sun was not God. And now she could see that the only true creator, the only true and real God was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And she and her people, who had been worshipping the sun, now realized that only Allah was worthy of worship. The appearance of her throne and the water that was glass in the palace were all signs of Allah's greatness. And she immediately said, "O my Lord, I have been wrong all my life. Now I pledge myself to Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam and to the will of Allah, the Lord of all worlds." Prophet Sulayman alayhi salam thanked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for helping him guide the queen towards the right path. And Queen Bilqis spent the rest of her life helping others to the right path.
So if you're interested in seeing some of the other lessons in this Islamic Waldorf-inspired main lesson block on the letters, you can tap on the screen right now. If you want more information about this curriculum that I have created, you can find that on my website at pepperandpine.com. And if you want to see what our homeschool looks like on a daily basis, you can find me on Instagram at pepperandpine.